It's a strange world we're living in, isn't it, where it's bifurcated. Normally it'd be the case that we'd be seeing emerging markets perhaps being, I guess, running for the hills and trying to batten down the hatches, have hawkish monetary policy. But instead it's the other way around. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I think that is indeed one of the features at the moment. Definitely if you look at the Asian EMs, but even more broadly, EM universe more generally. I think we've seen a process in the developed markets with, overheated economies, lots of fiscal stimulus, in a way, a little bit of EM behavior perhaps, and that is coming back to hurt these economies, whereas many of the EMs have had fairly sensible macro policies, quite cautious during COVID, not lots of fiscal stimulus, and so therefore they are coming out of COVID in a, with a different kind of an economy, with a not overheated economy.
Now, in terms of monetary policy, I mean, most of EM Asia has stopped hiking rates. In fact, Vietnam has started cutting. Do you think we'll be in an easing cycle within 2 quarters? China's already easing, in fact, on that point.
Yeah, China has its own path, but I think for other than that, I think that most EM most EM central banks over here are pretty much done. The question is, how soon can we start to look at cuts? And I think there is going to be a bit of a delay. I don't think we're going to see a quick, descent after the ascent, because we are all in this region still quite dependent on what's happening globally and with the Fed. And as long as the Fed rates continue to, creep higher rather than lower, I think central banks here will be cautious and don't want to go down too fast.
Can we be confident in thinking that inflation in this part of the world has basically cooled down enough?
I think
to suggest that this extended pause can happen for some time for some of these central banks.
I would say that is the case in almost all of Asia. There are a few exceptions. Australia and New Zealand are two, and Japan has again its own fascinating story. But other than those, I would say inflation is pretty much reasonably under control.
Lewis, I was just focusing on China and giving the various bits of data we're getting and lots of data, in the contours that they're creating. What is the situation of the Chinese economy, and should we be worried?
So we are all reading the newspaper that tell us about the dire state of the Chinese recovery. If you look at the data, we've had a really strong first quarter and then a few weaker months. I still think that the recovery is continuing. It has definitely slowed down in terms of the tempo. Consumption is not as bad as the consumer confidence numbers suggest. People are really not very upbeat, and that's true for consumers. It's also true for business people, and there are things other than the cycle that have to do with that, I think. Getting confidence back in the housing market among consumers, businesses is a really important part of the puzzle. But looking at the growth momentum, I would say we're still in for a recovery. It's just not a very strong recovery, and secondly, it's a kind of peculiar one. It's not the kind of Chinese recovery that helps lots of other countries buy commodity imports and things like that, because the housing market is still so weak.